Thank you very much, Professor Kogai, for that very kind introduction. I want to thank everybody for coming here. Thank you, faculty, for arranging this. We've been talking about this for a while, and a special recognition for Ambassador Heng, my good friend from Cambodia, who now has the headache of becoming the chairman of ASEAN. Congratulations, I'll pass on that headache to you. And also, my good friend Satuli Maye, who is a very dynamic, young, energetic, and even good-looking head of the East-West Center based in Washington, D.C. And thank you also for reminding me about the my history with Washington, D.C. I actually went to high school here. I went to McLean High School in 1979 to 1981. Very interesting time. That was a time when passing of presidency from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, and this is what sparked my interest in politics and diplomacy. And I've been trying to contact McLean High School to be able to give a speech to the students because I was really a mediocre student. I flunked most of my courses. I fell asleep. I didn't, and in my classes, I didn't listen to my teacher. So, you know, the title of my speech would be "How a Mediocre Student McLean student could make it as ambassador." Seriously. But I haven't got any response from them. So if you have any connections, please let me know. I'd love to share those tricks with them. It just makes me nervous when I come here to American University and you say, you'll be speaking to the students, and I'll come here, everybody wearing suits. Right? So, and it's very intimidating. And can I make an announcement that everybody from State Department, please get out now. I see Mark here, a couple of people, John. Can I ask you to rise up so we can recognize everybody from the government of the United States? Can you rise up, please? Come on, don't be shy. Well, it's been a great pleasure for me to work with them. They're very good people, and especially I love the fact that as ambassador of Indonesia in this land, I can call any of them at 1 in the morning and actually get away with it because they say, "Oh yeah, ambassador, it's for such an important issue. Yeah, what do you want to talk about?" And you know they're actually sleeping, you know. So thank you very much for your cooperation. But Indonesia, the chairmanship of ASEAN last year, and this is what I want to talk to you about our experience of becoming chairman of ASEAN. And what are the lessons learned? So I'll talk about those things, and then at the end, we'll open the discussions with Q&A afterwards. Let me begin by saying that there was good build-up to the ASEAN summit at the end of last year, and also to the East Asia summit. There was a great deal of anticipation and also exhaustion on our part because the diplomatic agenda all year long had been quite hectic. And most of the participants at the East Asia Summit had traveled quite long distances and taken part in both the G20 meetings and APEC and then the East Asia Summit in Indonesia. So for a majority of the leaders taking part in these three summits, it's been quite a long and exhaustive diplomatic agenda, which took them away from their country. And I'm going to touch about this as one of the lessons learned at the end of my talk. What also added to the great expectation of the East Asia Summit was the first-time participation of America and Russia. This is important because at first the East Asia Summit was to be an organization of 16 states, ASEAN, and then the three Northeast Asian countries of China, South Korea, and Japan, and then added to it Australia and India. One more, I forget which one. But New Zealand, there we go. Sorry, is the New Zealand ambassador here? Okay, don't tell him I forget about his country. But there was always a feeling and a question, where would the United States be in this evolving architecture? And the decision was made that we would invite the United States to take part in it, and also Russia. And what happened was it changed the dynamics, the weight of the East Asia Summit. Regional organization with America and Russia is very different from having a regional organization without Russia and America. But at the East Asia Summit, we got word from the Russians that neither President Medvedev or Prime Minister Putin would take part in Bali. So the attention was a lot more focused on the attendance of President Obama. Right? So a lot of anticipation and about America's participation, how it would be done, and especially a lot of eyes on President Obama, while the Russian participation was at the level of foreign minister. And also around the time that this was going to happen, there was news about the enhanced American Marine presence in Darwin. This had become news by the time of the APEC conference in Hawaii. And despite the fact that there was some media spotlight on it and some politicians' comments on it, and I assure you that on the part of Indonesia, we were not alarmed about this enhanced marine presence, American marine presence in Darwin. The president made this very clear. And the reason being that both Australia and America had become Indonesia's comprehensive partner. With America since last year, and with Australia since 2005. Right? So the fact that our relationship with America and Australia had become elevated, and there's a relationship of trust and confidence building between our countries meant that we were not worried about this. So what was reported in media was not accurate. In the run-up to the summit in Bali, Secretary Clinton came up with a speech called Pacific Century. And this was a speech, well, first at the East-West Center in Hawaii, but also in an article that she wrote for Foreign Policy magazine. I sent this back home, and there's some article that received a lot of attention among the policymakers in the Asia Pacific because it was talking about America's pivot back to the Asia Pacific, and there was a lot of statements emphasizing on rebalancing, re-engagement with Asia, and that was very much noticed. And we note that the term that was used was Pacific Century, which meant that the 21st century would be centered at the Pacific Ocean, which means that it would not be just China-centric, which would be the case if we have called it Asian-centric, but it would also be U.S.-centric and larger. So it was clear that in the vision enunciated by Pacific Century concept, America sees the 21st century as being a century where America would still be critical to the geoeconomic and geostrategic game. My president in Hawaii sort of responded to the Pacific Century concept when he came up at the APEC CEO Summit with a concept called Asia Pacific Century. Right? So not just Pacific Century, but Asia Pacific Century. There's slight difference in our understanding of it. In the term Asia Pacific Century, yes, we recognize it's not just an Asian century, but it's an Asia Pacific in the sense that, yes, we recognize that America would also, as in the 20th century, in the 21st century, that would still play a significant role in shaping world affairs, just as we would expect China and India and all the other emerging powers would. But an additional caveat to that was that in the Asia Pacific century, we recognize that the Indian Ocean would also be equally important as the Pacific Ocean, right? And we think that the Indian Ocean, which is still not receiving enough attention among the policymakers and academia probably, we believe that it will be an area of rising geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic importance in the 21st century. So these are some of the things that provide the background to the ASEAN Summit and East Asia Summit in Bali in December. And in the region itself, there were a lot of events that highlighted the context, the political and diplomatic context of the Asian Summit and the East Asia Summit. In Indonesia, there was a lot of feel-good nationalist pride in Indonesia. When I say nationalist pride, I'm saying in a positive, moderate fashion. We had just concluded a very successful Southeast Asia Games. I don't know if you ever heard about it, but in Southeast Asia, it's actually a big deal, you know. And not only that, we actually won the most gold medal in the Southeast Asia game, which is unusual because we usually lost a lot of medals. We were usually the largest country in Southeast Asia. We were number 4 or 5, and it was very embarrassing. But this time we were number 1, you know, and you know everyone's like, yeah, Indonesia number 1. Yeah, now let's make the East Asia Summit a big success. You know, so it was that kind of spirit. Our economic growth was 6.5%. You know, this is third highest after China and India. You know, which is a great, for us, a big deal. You know, while everybody else was declining in their economic growth, we kept rising with 6.5% economic growth. And even ASEAN, the average growth was about 7.4%, which is much higher than the 5% world average at the time. So not just in Indonesia, but across ASEAN, there was a very good feeling of confidence and optimism. And the U.S. trade was up 27% with the region, reaching $186 billion. And the FDI, American FDI to the region, rose by 100%. And even the discussions on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was participated by a few countries in the Southeast Asia region, added new dynamism and expectations and a lot of talk about the opportunities that were present in the region. And this was in deep contrast to the mood in Europe. You know, at the time, last year, you know, I'm sure it's still going on this year, Europe was declining in terms of confidence and there was a feeling of uncertainty and so on and so on. But in Southeast Asia, it's the exact opposite, right? And this gave context to the psychological mood as we anticipated the East Asia Summit. So there was a lot of anticipation, there was a lot of attention, a lot of expectation, and there was new energy and new movements in Asia, diplomatically, economically, and also strategically. And as if all this was not enough, in the run-up to the President Barack Obama's arrival in Bali, I was quite nervous about a certain Twitter. It kept me all night, and every hour I had to check what was the Twitter saying about Indonesia. There's an American who Satu Limaya told me was a very, very important person in America. And the name of this American was Paris Hilton. And she was in Bali. I don't know who she is, but Satu Limaya said that she's very important. But in Bali, she tweeted about wherever she went, saw, and did, and talked to everybody, every minute. And you know, she got millions of followers. And my nightmare would be if this person, Paris Hilton, would tweet something like, "I've had it with Bali and Indonesia, don't come here," right? Then that would be a bad nightmare for me. But fortunately, all the tweets were very nice, perhaps because of Satu Limaya's intervention. And we were spared of any embarrassment prior to the East Asia Summit. Right? So, what happened in Bali? What happened in Bali? The big show came about. We were all ready. I should say that we wanted to make the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN summits in Bali not just another summit. You know, ASEAN had moved from an organization which met only once a year and rarely so into an organization which met twice a year at the leaders level. And we wanted to make sure that this Bali became a milestone event, something that defines strategic direction of ASEAN and regional architecture for the future. And we did not want to create a summit that only produced more documents, you know, because that's the tendency in any summit, you know, whatever it's G20, EU, or whatever, or APEC, it's just a lot of documents that very few people actually read, including the leaders themselves. You'd be surprised how many of the leaders actually read the joint declarations that was actually produced. That's not for quotation, of course. But we don't want to produce just more documents. We want more substance and more knowledge and more direction to the ASEAN summits and to the East Asia summits, and also more action. And let me just say that we are pleased with the results. And let me say what the results that were achieved in Bali. First, of course, we achieved what is called the Bali Concord 3. This is previously, since ASEAN was established since 1967, there were only 2 Bali Concord treaties. And in the run-up to the Bali meeting, there's this concept called ASEAN community that is to be achieved by 2015, which is 3 years from now. And in the Bali Concord 3, the basic question is, what happens after 2015? This has not been answered. It's quite clear what we wanted to achieve by 2015. There's a clear blueprint and action plans on political, security, economic, social, cultural realms, but not enough. But not known, what is not known is what happens after 2015. And the biggest question was how ASEAN would fit in the global community. The ASEAN community was about how ASEAN envisions Southeast Asia, right? And that's quite clear. There's very practical elements that answers this question. But in terms of how ASEAN would fit in the global context, that remains unanswered. And this is what Bali Concord 3 is all about. And if you look at that document, it outlines extensively what ASEAN should do in the global context in terms of more diplomatic coordination. There will still be not single foreign and security policy. It will not happen in ASEAN for the near future. But there's going to be more coordination and more activities on common global issues that all are enunciated in the declaration of ASEAN Concord. The second result, and this was actually a difficult thing for us to envisage, was the declaration on East Asia Summit principles. Right. Now, why is this important? All this time, ASEAN had what is called the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which means you have a treaty whereby ASEAN's partners would sign on to it, and by doing so, they would agree to to some kind of code of conduct and regional norms that would be an instrument for them to participate with the regional actors of ASEAN countries. But the question that we wanted to ask was, okay, not just between the major powers towards the regional actors, not just between the major powers in ASEAN, what should be the binding code of conduct between the major powers themselves? So it's not just between the big powers and the ASEAN nations. How about between them? And this is relevant because the Asia-Pacific region is still a region where you have tension in the Korean Peninsula, you have tension in South China Sea, and a lot of flashpoints with potentials for the use of force, border skirmishes, renewed conflicts, or new conflicts, and so on and so on. So we wanted to produce something that would be not legally binding, but morally binding for the signatories to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, and something that would be morally binding among the major powers. And to be honest, I can reveal to you that when we had this idea in the beginning, we weren't sure that this would fly. You know, I mean, how do you how do you persuade America and China and Russia and all the others to agree to this? Diplomatic precedence dictates that this was not an easy thing to do. But we tried it, and for some reason, alhamdulillah, it wasn't rejected. And I said, hey, we're onto something. And we pushed it, and we got new language, and they said, looks good, we don't have any objections to this. A couple of them added a few words, a few paragraphs, and before we know it, at the end, we came up with this declaration of principles that is morally binding, not legally binding, but morally, and I can even say politically binding to those who signed on to it. And I just hope my American friends knew what they were signing on to, because we're gonna hold them accountable to it on many regional issues, just as we would call China and Japan, Korea, and all the others accountable to this. But what are the principles? It's all in the website, but things like respect for international law. And you might say, well, what's the big deal? Respect for international law, we all know this. Well, keep in mind that this is a place where, in the South China Sea, respect for international law, especially international law of the sea, is still a big question mark. And it's still an issue that is being hotly debated in many documents and so on and so on. There's a lot of diplomatic tussle back and forth on these issues. Non-use of force, renunciation of use of force. You might say, hey, what's the big deal? It is a big deal. You know, you look at what's going on, what had happened, the skirmishes in the Korean peninsula, in the waters in Northeast Asia, and even in the potential skirmishes in the South China Sea is important. Of course, it doesn't mean that it will never happen. It doesn't mean that. But when it does happen, we're going to refer to this document and say, hey, you sign on to this. You sign on to this. What's going on? Okay. Others is fundamental freedoms and human rights. You know it's very important, given what is going on in Asia Pacific, the political changes, the spread of democracy, and the continuing political problems. To have a document that is morally binding and politically binding, starting on fundamental freedoms and human rights, and also peaceful settlement of disputes is very important. And other principles such as moderation, respect for diversity, and also international cooperation. You know, there are about 7 or 8 principles that they all sign on to. And Indonesia believes that this is not just a piece of paper. This is actually a good strategic document on principles of how to behave and how to develop regional architecture in the region. The next one is on the nuclear weapons free zone in Southeast Asia. This had been actually not dead, but stagnant for many years now. And what we wanted was to ensure that the nuclear powers, especially America and China, sign on to this. It's very important, because otherwise the Southeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone doesn't mean much unless these countries sign on to it. And we're very happy with President Barack Obama making nuclear disarmament a top priority of his administration. So we counted on America to support this, which America did. There was some issues about China signing on to it, and we worked a lot of the lawyers worked hard on making sure that the legalities or China's legal concerns were addressed. And alhamdulillah, again, they reached an agreement in principle. There's still not a document signed, but we expect that it's a matter of time now that the parties have agreed in principle on how to sign the document of the nuclear weapon free zone area in Southeast Asia. Maritime issue became prominent somehow. There was a lot of back and forth on this within ASEAN, because within ASEAN, you know, there's claimants to the South China Sea. You have Philippines, you have Vietnam, Brunei, and Malaysia. 4 of the 6 South China Sea claimants came from ASEAN. And there was a lot of back and forth, I would say, also between America and China on this issue. And then others also stressed the importance of maritime security issue being discussed at the East Asia Summit. The good news on the South China Sea part was that since July, the ASEAN nations and China had agreed to finalize a declaration of conduct in the South China Sea. Now, just to give you an indication of how significant this is a document that took 10 years to finalize, 10 years. And you know, I read the documents, it's just a 2-page document, and it's really not a difficult document. You know, I have Adam, who's my legal advisor. He looked at this document and said, it took 10 years to agree to this, you know, but that reflects the complexity of the issue and the speed with which ASEAN and China were comfortably willing to address this issue. And at some point, my president, when he looked at the timeline and we looked at the document, he said, this, you can't agree after 10 years. And my president stepped in during the ASEAN-China ministerial meeting in July and said, you gotta sign on to this. You gotta have, ASEAN has to have credibility, and the time to sign this is now. And my president, I think, literally hit everybody over the head, and not literally, but in the end, the document was signed, but only because somebody pushed for it and pushed really hard. Now the challenge is how to move from declaration of conduct to the code of conduct, which contains what are the practical elements of this code of conduct in the South China Sea. And this is what the next phase is all about in terms of South China Sea management. But I can tell you that there's been some progress, if you ask me, in how China deals with the South China Sea issue. China in the beginning just wants to deal with South China Sea issue on a bilateral basis. Right? They don't want to deal with it on a trilateral or regional basis. This is their position a long time ago, and I believe when it comes to negotiating the boundaries, they still hold on to that position. But there's been some movement because China now believes, okay, still bilaterally, but we don't mind working with ASEAN. We don't mind dealing with the other 4 or 5 claimant states in the South China Sea. And this is what's happening with the ASEAN-China Forum. So there's actually an improvement in how China manages the South China Sea because they are moving now from strictly bilateral approach to an approach whereby they say, okay, we'll engage ASEAN. But it stops there for them. China is not going to agree, or China says it doesn't want to agree to discussing this beyond ASEAN partners. So that's where it's at now. But like I said, it presents some kind of movement forward in China's South China Sea strategy. Myanmar. This is, again, an issue. There was elections in Myanmar, and then some political developments happened, and I think many were surprised at the degree by which political reforms were taking place in Myanmar, and especially it mattered that Aung San Suu Kyi has developed a good cooperation with the new government in Myanmar under President Thein Sein, and she says that Thein Sein is somebody who can be trusted, and that she regards him as a friend, and then the government in Myanmar has committed to allowing Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD to take part in the provincial election. So a lot of things that are happening in Myanmar that many of us, in fact all of us, did not expect, right? And so there was kind of feeling that, okay, Myanmar is moving forward politically, and I think now it's time to give Myanmar a fair shot in terms of assuming chairmanship in 2014. There was some back and forth between ASEAN and other countries on this, but in the end, ASEAN came up with sort of a declaration or a statement saying that ASEAN endorsed Myanmar to be chairman of ASEAN by 2014 and hopes that the present political reforms would continue. Now, Indonesia was very strongly supportive of this back then. I don't know about now because just a week ago, the Myanmar football team came to Indonesia and beat us 10-0. Seriously, I don't know if you know, do you play soccer? When you play soccer, you lose 1-0 or 2-1, right? The worst is 3-1, but 10-0 is unheard of. And if they had played that game before the East Asia Summit, I'm not sure we're politically ready to support Myanmar chairmanship in 2014. And don't tell the Myanmarese ambassador I said that, please. But another issue is the East Timor. Indonesia, Southeast Asia was envisaged as regional organization. ASEAN was envisaged as a regional organization of 10 countries. Because in Southeast Asia, in 1967, there were only 10 countries. But then in 2000, one new member came up, which is Timor-Leste. It came after a referendum that was done, and it separated from Indonesia and became an independent state. Now, Indonesia, the last country that you would expect to support Timor-Leste's joining ASEAN would be Indonesia, given the fact that we have a difficult history with Timor-Leste, to say the least. I'm just being very diplomatic here. But the fact is, remarkably, Indonesia now is the strongest supporter of Timor-Leste joining ASEAN. We're the #1 proponent of it. We keep pushing this. And there's still some disagreement within ASEAN on this issue, but we're quite adamant on this because we think the regional architecture is not complete unless Timor-Leste, as the only country outside ASEAN, remains outside ASEAN. So they should join. And if the argument is Timor-Leste is too small, hey, Brunei is much smaller. Brunei is, what is it, 250,000 if I'm not mistaken. Timor-Leste is over 1 million people, right? But the point is, cannot happen an enduring and coherent regional architecture unless everybody's in it. And that last everybody is Timor-Leste.